All right, today we are tackling one of the biggest, most destructive events in all of human history, the Second World War. We're going to look at how the Axis powers came to be and trace all the decisions that dragged the entire world down the path to war.
I know, that question sounds a little weird, right? But seriously, it gets right to the heart of our story. We're about to see how a whole mess of national anger, some brand new, radical ideas, and a few very powerful personalities all mixed together to create this perfect storm of aggression that ended up swallowing the whole planet.
So to really get this, we have to go back in time, to the end of World War I. Europe is basically a smoldering wreck. The political chaos and the economic misery everywhere created the perfect breeding ground for some extreme new ideologies, and of course, the strong men who were pushing them.
First up, we've got Benito Mussolini, and his political journey, well, it's a real roller coaster. He starts out as this hardcore socialist, a big anti-war guy. He even dodged the draft. But then World War I happens, and it completely flips him. All of a sudden, he's super pro-war, which gets him booted from the Socialist Party. So what does he do? He just invents his own ideology, fascism.
You know, Mussolini's rise makes a whole lot of sense when you look at the state Italy was in. I mean, they were technically on the winning side of World War I, but they felt totally ripped off by the peace deals. But here's the really crucial point. Germany, the country they beat in the war, was in almost the exact same boat. Both countries had terrible economies, weak governments, and a whole lot of really unhappy people just looking for a savior.
And for Germany, the source of all that misery had a name, the Treaty of Versailles. Man, the terms were just humiliating. They lost land, their army was shrunk down to almost nothing, they weren't allowed to have an air force, and they were forced to pay these insane reparations. The feeling of being completely powerless was so intense that our source even throws in that last funny made-up point just to drive it home.
And so, with all this anger and desperation in the air, what happens? Well, another guy shows up, and he basically takes a page right out of Mussolini's playbook. Adolf Hitler comes along and promises to make Germany great again. And the German people, who were desperate for any kind of hope, they just ate it up. By 1933, he's the chancellor, and now Europe has two fascist dictators.
But look, this storm wasn't just brewing in Europe, not by a long shot. We need to look halfway around the world, where another ambitious country was making its own moves, fueled by its own set of problems and imperial dreams. Let's talk about Japan.
Japan's story is just whoa. The transformation was so incredibly fast. For 200 years, they were totally isolated. Then the US Navy shows up and forces them to start trading. That shock basically kickstarts a massive industrial revolution. But there's a problem. Japan's an island. It doesn't have the natural resources, the oil, the rubber that it needs. So it starts looking at its neighbors. It pulls off a shocking win against Russia in 1905, takes over Korea, and by 1931, it's making up excuses to invade and conquer Manchuria and China.
And this is where Japan really starts to get resentful. They see this massive hypocrisy. The Western powers are wagging their fingers telling Japan, hey, you can't just take parts of China, while at the same time they're setting up their own zones of control in the exact same place. So in Japan's mind, the message was clear. If you want to be respected, you have to build your own empire, and you have to do it by force.
So the stage is set, right? You've got these three really aggressive, expansionist countries, Germany, Italy, and Japan, all kind of moving in the same direction. Now we're going to see what happens when their actions start to line up and how the Allies' totally weak response just poured gasoline on the fire. Hitler starts by just tearing up the Treaty of Versailles, piece by piece. He openly starts rebuilding the German Air Force. He brings back the military draft, and then he makes this huge gamble and marches his army back into the Rhineland, which was supposed to be a demilitarized zone. And the Allies' response to all these blatant violations? Crickets. Absolutely nothing. And that sends a very, very loud message to Hitler. You can get away with this stuff.
But you have to understand, Hitler's goals were way bigger than just reversing a treaty. It all came down to this one core Nazi idea, Lebensraum. It literally means living space. This was the belief that the German people were destined to expand eastward, conquering their neighbors to make room for the so-called Aryan race to grow.
The Allied strategy for dealing with this was, well, it was called appeasement, and it was a total disaster. The cycle was just ridiculous and so predictable. Hitler would say, I want that thing over there. The Allies would complain a bit, but then say, okay, you can have it, but that's it, no more. And then, of course, Hitler would immediately do it again.
And the absolute peak of this whole thing, the most infamous example, is when British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain goes to Munich and agrees to just give Hitler a huge chunk of Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain flies home, waving this piece of paper, and declares he has secured peace for our time. Yeah, a few months later, Hitler just took the rest of Czechoslovakia.
So, Czechoslovakia is gone. Hitler's next target? Poland. And this is the final line in the sand. The Allies finally warn him that if he invades Poland, that's it, it's war. And this sets the stage for the war to officially start, but in a really, really weird way.
But before he moves on Poland, Hitler pulls off the most unbelievable diplomatic shocker of the century. He signs a non-aggression pact with his #1 ideological enemy, Joseph Stalin, and the Soviet Union. And the secret part of the deal, they agreed to both invade Poland and just split it between them. It just blew everyone's mind and gave Hitler the green light he needed.
So, September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland. Britain and France declare war. And then, nothing happens. Seriously, it gets called the phony war because everyone just sits there. France pokes its head into Germany for a second and goes home. The British Royal Air Force drops propaganda leaflets instead of bombs. Nobody wanted a repeat of the horrible trench warfare from World War I.
But this weird quiet couldn't last forever. While the Allies were waiting around, Germany was getting ready to unleash something brand new. Something that would just completely shatter the stalemate with terrifying speed. And that something was blitzkrieg. It means lightning war in German. And that is exactly what it was. Forget the slow, grinding trenches of World War I. This was all about speed and overwhelming force, using tanks and planes together to punch a hole right through the enemy lines and cause total chaos behind them. The Allies were still thinking in WW1 terms. They had no idea what was about to hit them.
And this is where the French made a massive, fatal mistake. They looked at the Ardennes forest, it's all hilly and dense with trees, and they thought, nah, no army can get through there, it's basically impenetrable. So they didn't really defend it. The German plan, on the other hand, was pretty simple. Penetrate it with everything we've got.
And that is exactly what they did. The German panzers just smashed right through the forest, got behind the main Allied armies, and completely surrounded them. It was a total disaster. In just a matter of weeks, France, one of the world's great powers, had fallen. The only glimmer of hope was this miraculous, desperate escape by the British army from the beaches of Dunkirk, on any boat they could find.
So with France conquered, Hitler basically has all of continental Europe under his boot. Great Britain is now totally, completely alone. Hitler was absolutely sure they'd just give up and sue for peace. Boy, was he about to find out how wrong he was.
Hitler unleashes his air force on Britain, trying to bomb them into submission. The bombing of cities like London was relentless, day after day, night after night. But the British people just would not break. As one observer put it at the time, they were smiling, knitting, lounging casually. These people have balls of steel. That incredible civilian toughness gave the Royal Air Force just enough breathing room to fight back. And against all the odds, the outnumbered RAF won the Battle of Britain, and they stopped a German invasion. But this victory left the world on a complete knife's edge. The Axis controlled pretty much all of Europe, which leaves us with this one huge critical question. With an unconquered Britain as the only foothold left, how in the world could the Allies possibly hope to fight their way back and reclaim the continent?